Today we're going to be reading Chapter 3 of Origin Curse. And before then, I just want to have a little bit of a chat about author life. So, for those of you who don't know, I do actually record this at about 3 AM or 3:30. Yep, pretty crazy, but that's the only time of the day when the world is quiet enough. I live in quite an old house, which, for Australia, means that the walls are really thin. So if I try recording any later, I'll just start competing with all the birds, the lorikeets and the cockatoos waking up, singing their little hearts out, tradies roaring past in the main road beside my house, and, also my toddler deciding that now is the perfect time to wake up early and hang out, which is really cute, but toddler hands are not very good for audio mics. Another interesting thing that I hadn't thought about when it came to audio recording is with recording something that's already written down like a book, it feels completely different when I get to recording the intro and the outro. So you may have noticed for the last couple of episodes I was recording the intro and the outro separately because I just got so nervous for some reason in doing it. So I felt way better to do it at a separate time and then glue them together. But I did notice quite a lot of sound difference even recording them just at different times of the day. So from here I'm going to try recording the intros and the outros all together. I think over time I'll get smoother and way less embarrassed, but it's one of those things where you've just got to do it, right? That said, recording and editing just takes so much longer than I expected. The more I do it, though, I do notice I get smoother. For example, picking up tricks to speed recording or editing up. I learned recently the finger click trick, where if you mess up a line, you can click your fingers and it will leave a really big spike in the audio. So it's really easy to spot mistakes when it comes to editing. Someone also really recently introduced me to punch and roll recording, which I'm going to try from now on. So let's see how that goes. Apparently it's meant to help speed up the editing. Another thing that recording audiobook never really thought of but has given me in terms of author growth and writing is I really love immersive description, but I've realised that in narration, the really long fluid sentences that you would normally get in immersive fantasy writing, it makes you run out of breath. So now I'm challenging myself to see if I can blend that immersive style with a shorter, punchier style sentences, which you'll notice in my current book, Iron Angels, which will be coming out later this year, hopefully. I know people always say to read your book out loud when you're editing. It helps you spot mistakes. It does, but, in that case you just end up muttering it under your breath. It's not the same as recording it as if you were recording it for someone to listen to as an audiobook. When you record, you end up speaking, you have to speak more clearly, pace yourself, speak slower, make sure the words actually flow well when spoken. That's when you notice the real changes. But you don't do that when you're just reading it to yourself when editing. I think that writing advice should change to record your book like you're narrating it for real. Then you'll see how it reads. Okay, enough behind the scenes chatter. Let's get into Chapter 3. Chapter 3. When Safety Becomes the Cage. That night, in the privacy of her bedchambers and the comfort of her futon, Yoshiko had yet to sleep for mourning her father's death when she heard someone climbing the outer tenshu walls to her bedroom. Her heart lurched. After her father's death and her mother's warning, Yoshiko's mind leapt to the next logical thing. Whoever had organised her father's death had now sent someone after her. She grabbed her tanto knife, ripped herself from the warm embrace of her futon, and hid in the shadows beside the window. If anyone came in, her blade would meet them. She slowed her breath. A soft exhale, quiet even for her sharp hearing, came from outside. Her blood tingled. Then her eyes caught a flash of black hair whip in with the wind, and a low mutter came from whoever hid beyond. Did we not teach you better than to hide beside the window? It's the most obvious place to catch someone climbing through. Mother? Yoshiko watched, stunned, as Asami appeared, crouching in the window's wooden frame. The daimyo's hair was wild and windswept, and her face was pale, making her black eyes look darker than ever. Dragon daimyo Asami seemed unearthly and wild tonight, like the yokai ghost women in his folk tales. A small smile freed itself on Asumi's face when she saw the look of surprise and horror on her daughter's face. Then she looked behind, out of the window, and gestured for Yoshiko to fall silent. Yoshiko did. Finally, quickly, gather your most essential things, get dressed into something practical, pack spares, your most used weapons, and your comb. Where are we going? Hurry, I'll explain later. Yoshiko opened her mouth to ask another question, but saw the dark look in her mother's narrowed eyes. She'd rarely seen her mother like this. Then Yoshiko noticed the shadows under her mother's eyes. It looked like Asumi had already spent most of the night outside. While her mother peered outside, Yoshiko swiftly changed into a light indigo wrap tunic and mid-indigo hakama. She pulled on sturdy shoes and a thick haori, tied her hair back, and gathered her basic belongings as instructed. Finally, she tied her katana to her hakama. Tie it well to keep your hands free, Asumi hissed as she crouched in the window, looking back into the room. A gust of wind whipped her hair into her face again. Asumi didn't even flinch. Yoshiko tied her pack across her body and nodded to her mother. Asumi began climbing back down the wall. When Yoshiko reached the window and looked down, the wind picked up again. She gulped. Here on one of the top floors of the Tenshu, it was a long way down to the platform the keep stood on, and there were a few handholds. How is she doing that? Yoshiko stared incredulously at Asumi, who was descending with little effort. When Asumi noticed her daughter wasn't following, she looked up, an eyebrow raised. How am I supposed to follow you? I've not made it a habit to climb up and down the keep before, Yoshiko hissed, leaning out of the window and looking down at her mother. The cold night wind picked up in their hair, sending shivers down Yoshiko's back. To your right, Asumi indicated with her head and continued climbing. A rope. While Yoshiko had been getting ready, Asumi must have prepared a rope for her daughter to climb down. Yet when Yoshiko peered into the darkness below, away from the dim light of the lantern in her room, she could see Asumi wasn't using one. Yoshiko closed her eyes and readied herself. Then, taking a deep breath, she heaved herself through the window, pulling her hakama out of the way so she didn't trip and plummet to the platform below. She clasped the rope and planted her feet firmly on the wall, daring to lean back. Yoshiko swallowed nervously, wondering whether the next layer down sloped tiled roof would catch her if she fell, and whether she'd slide right down it to the ground. Quicker! Asumi hissed from below, jolting Yoshiko from her worries. Yoshiko rushed to follow, trying not to think about plummeting to her death. Yoshiko lowered herself down the keep's white wall and across the jutting, sloped green tile eaves of the layer below before hauling herself down the next layer. The Hiei Tenshu was 5 floors high, from the outside, with an extra floor going below the ground that you couldn't see from looking at the building. And with her sleeping rooms in one of the top floors, she'd have to scale down multiple levels of wall and gables. Her face scrunched tight when she thought she heard one of the tiles slip in its place, under the weight of her rope. Nothing fell. She dared not look down, not even at her mother, until she was well over the next layers of sloping eaves and onto hard ground, where she finally felt safe to pause. But Yoshiko had barely landed, with her feet firmly on the stone, before her mother grabbed her hand and pulled her away. What about the rope? Yoshiko muttered to her mother as they crouched low at a corner to take stock of their surroundings. Leave it. It will be obvious we escaped somehow. By the time it's found, we'll be long gone. If we go back for it, they might spot us. Gone where? Spotted by who? Yoshiko still couldn't understand why they were leaving. Surely now, of all times, the people needed to see their leaders acting rationally and strong. She couldn't understand her mother's thought processes. "Earlier, you said we'd stay. Why are we leaving?" Her mother didn't answer her. She pulled a simple kanzashi hairpin from inside her jacket and used it to twist her hair up, out of the way. "We're heading to the bridge." Asumi's palace, a white 5-tiered tenshu keep with black features and green slated layer roofs, sat in the corner of a stone, square-shaped folk-made platform. To create a courtyard with it, 3 long, single-floor white buildings with the same dark slate roofs had joined the main building. The platform itself was a sharp stone wall of several meters. It rested on 2 further layered platforms that formed the main palace grounds, with steps between each platform that Yoshiko and Asumi would now have to navigate to escape. On the bottom, larger base platform were stables and beautiful gardens and walkways that Yoshiko had spent her time earlier that day to paint the flowers for her father. On that same level, a large courtyard dedicated to arrivals was guarded by an otemon gateway that led to a painted green bridge that spanned the great width of a moat that protected the castle compound and separated it from the main Hiei town. Once they'd navigated the steps to the lower platform, Asumi and Yoshiko would need to cross this moat to leave. The thing that protected them had become the trap. The bridge was well guarded by samurai in a watchtower and had regular patrols, both monitoring those who entered and left the compound and keeping watch on the upper town for raids. Along with having to find a way to cross this bridge, only one set of steps led from the court of the top platform level they crouched in now to the second and third levels towards the lower grounds and the bridge below. If they didn't time it right, a patrol would catch them on the steps. Asumi tugged at her daughter's howdy sleeve and darted off, keeping low as she ran along the edge of a courtyard building towards the steps that led down to the second level. Yoshiko followed, heart in her throat. What if a maid came out to run a duty and saw them? Yoshiko felt sick. Every smallest sound rang like a warning, and her heart sounded worse. It pounded loudly, almost to the point Yoshiko thought the rest of the compound would hear it and find them. How could she escape like this, with her blood feeling like thick honey and her body sluggish? She'd trained since she was a child to be agile and should have handled something like this. But when it came to it, she disappointed herself. A rattling cough from around the corner made both women halt in their places. Yoshiko looked around for a place to hide, finding nothing. Her heart roared. Instead, her mother reached up, grasped the dark overhanging tiled roof, and pulled herself up without a sound. Yoshiko watched, bewildered at the ease of her mother's movements, yet followed. Her hakama's fabric got caught underneath her knee as she pulled herself up, and she flailed sideways. Asumi caught her, a talon-like grip holding Yoshiko to the roof. Yoshiko winced at the feel of it. No wonder her mother had been able to climb up and down the walls. A pair of guards trudged through the archway and into the courtyard. If they'd been standing there at the wrong time, Yoshiko realized, it would have all been over. She glanced at her mother's face from the corner of her eye, and though it was dark, she could see her mother's face well. It was pale, showing the same concern. "Come," Asumi said when the guards had long passed. She leapt from the roof, hakama billowing beneath her. She landed softly and tucked herself into a roll to break her fall. Then Asumi looked back up, beckoning for her daughter to follow. This, at least, Yoshiko felt she could do. Compared with climbing down several layers of the keep's wall, the low buildings seemed small. She checked her pack was tight on her back, held her blade handle close in her left hand, and deftly dropped to the floor below, rolling with more trouble with the pack tied around her shoulders. As she stood, Yoshiko realized how much more she liked to be calmly reading with her father in one of the garden huts, overlooking the stream and clutching in her hands a hot cup of genmaicha. She didn't think she had the same energy as her mother, who now seemed quite at home, leaping about the compound, despite the circumstances. Yoshiko had often heard stories of what the young Asami had been like before meeting the poet Hitoshi. Now, Yoshiko felt she was finally able to see it for herself. The two women peered through the gateway to make sure no one else would march through. Almost instantly, before Yoshiko could figure out whether it was safe, Asami ran down the steps to the second level of the castle compound, where the administrative and governmental buildings were located, along with a small garden of seasonal trees. Trying to trust her mother, Yoshiko closed her eyes, took a breath, then followed, dashing through the carved stone gateway before slipping down the stone steps after Asami. At the bottom of the wide, shallow steps, the two women darted into the shadows of trees to the side. From the cover of the trees, they scanned the second level of the compound, watching guards on the lower levels. Usually so lively during the day, the silence at night felt eerie to Yoshiko. "Are there more guards than usual?" Yoshiko whispered to her mother, who leaned against a tree to look past it. Asami looked back at her, face beautiful with the flush of their escape on her cheeks. Her lips parted as if she was going to speak. And she paused, turning to look down onto the next platform at the entrance again. "Yes," she muttered. "You noticed. They will be expecting our escape." "Why?" Yoshiko couldn't understand it. Her father was dead, and they should be in mourning with the rest of the region. Her father had been well loved. Yoshiko still couldn't understand why someone would want to kill him, and why people would expect them to escape their castle because of it. As far as Yoshiko knew, no one knew she and her mother suspected anyone of killing him. "Later," Asami muttered. "It was a promise. Let's go." Yoshiko's breath caught in her throat when Asami dived forward, running through a courtyard and a large stone gate before descending the last long set of stone steps that led down to the final level, along the long edge of the garden, towards the bridge. Yoshiko rushed to keep up, watching her mother's every move. As the two women ran closer to the bridge, Yoshiko wondered what her mother would do with the guards supposedly keeping them in. Is mother just going to barge past and fight her way through? But Asami didn't have her sword or spear to fight them head-on, and judging by her mother's light attire, she just had her knives. Yoshiko wasn't armed enough to deal with fully armed guards either. She ran her hand subconsciously through her tied-back hair to ease her nerves, and then raced to keep up. And that's a wrap on Chapter 3. This time when I was recording, I did try the punch and roll technique that someone taught me to make sure that editing was easier later on. So if I made a mistake, I could just do Shift-D on the Apple Mac. And that would make sure that I could go back to the selection that I thought I'd made a mistake, and then it would automatically help me re-record. That was, I think, so much easier than going back and editing it. The click technique, where you can spot a error, is very good, but the punch and roll should be able to help you just do a smooth recording, have less to edit. But what's really interesting about recording an audiobook is that I didn't notice how much you could hear that, even small things in real life that you wouldn't even notice. For example, just scrolling on my laptop's keypad, that you can actually notice that in the recording. These tiny things I never think about in real life, they suddenly become really obvious in audio. So part of me feels really kind of bad for you guys, because actually my stomach was quite growly, especially towards the end. I do record this before breakfast. I thought I was okay. I wasn't hungry when I started recording. And then just in that last bit, it actually started growling pretty badly. So hopefully it doesn't pick it up. I did try to edit the worst ones out. But these are the challenges and the interesting parts of audio that, you don't think of until you get there. Tips for anyone else who thinks they might want to try audio recording. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me today. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe, and you can find me, Sarah Kate Ishii, on all major social media platforms. If you have any questions or just want to chat about writing, indie publishing, or even why stomachs are so loud when you need silence, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. See you next time for Chapter 4, hopefully with a quieter stomach. Until then, happy reading, stay creative, and have a fantastic day.